Now, of course, we're going to have specialized cells that are designed to move water, food, and nutrients inside and outside of the plant, and that task is essential to all plant survival. When enough specialized cells bind together, they form what we call tissues. And those tissues, when enough of them are bind together, form the essential organs that keep the organism running. Well, some of the tissues that are responsible for pushing the food and water in and out of the plants are the xylem tissues and the phloem tissues. When enough tissues bind together and form vessels, the vessels that transport the water through the plant are the xylem vessels. However, the original uptake of water in the roots occurs through the process of osmosis. And we're going to focus in on how water moves through the roots and gets transported to different parts of the plant. So when we use the terms like root pressure, we're talking about how the soil outside the root is hypotonic to the root cell. So water will enter the roots by osmosis. And hypotonic, right? If we say that the soil outside the root is hypotonic, we mean that it has less concentration of solute than the roots inside the cell. Now, once water enters the xylem tissues, or the tissues that make the vessels, then it's the properties of cohesion and adhesion, which belong to water, that actually help it go through the vessels. So now it's no longer pressure from the root. Now, water is a polar molecule, and what that means is one side of the molecule is partially negative and the other side is partially positive. And so what can happen is the partially positive end of the water molecule can attract the partially negative end of the other molecule, and this can repeat itself time and time again, allowing water to stick to itself very, very well. As a result, we have water that sticks to other water molecules and forms a long series or chain of water molecules, which can help it fit and mold through something like a xylem vessel. And so that's how partially they're pulled along the xylem vessel. So as the root pressure pushes, let's say, water up the vessel, what keeps the water flow intact is its cohesive properties. Now, due to the partial electrostatic charges that are on the molecule itself, water is also able to bind or attract other substances. So as a result, water can stick to the sides of a glass, can be absorbed quickly in something like a paper towel. And so what that does is that allows water to not fall through the tube, and as water binds to the sides of a vessel and water is pushed up, it allows more water to be collected overall. The last part of water transport in plants would be how water transpires outside from the leaves. And so again, now that we have a collection of water that has moved up through the xylem vessels, the water concentration is higher on the inside of the leaf cells than the outside or in the air. And so what that means is that the plant, we could say, is hypotonic to the environment because the water inside the plant has diluted its nutrients, right? Or the non-water molecules or the solutes. And so in order to help maintain the balance between the plant cells and their environment, water is now going to transpire out of the leaves into the environment in hopes of diluting the solutes that are in the environment and bringing the concentrations of solutes in the environment and in the plant to somewhat a state of equilibrium. And when enough sugar is collected from photosynthesis, the phloem vessels, again from the combination of several phloem tissues, the phloem vessels transport the sugars throughout the plant. Now, when we're talking about sugar, the phloem tissues are the primary agents of sugar transport. Remember that the sugar that now resides in the plant is going to be there as one of the products of photosynthesis. One of the things that is unique to plants, if we're comparing to animal cells, is that they can produce their own food, right? They convert chemical energy and light energy to food. Once the sugar is produced inside the leaves, your sugars are going to be actively transported from the leaves to the phloem tissue. And when I ask a question here, like what does active transport mean? It means that it needs energy, right? So it doesn't produce energy. It needs energy for this movement across the plant. And it also means that it's going against the concentration gradient. So it's going from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration. The third part of this process is something called the phloem transport. So once the sugars are pumped into the phloem tissue, the water flows due to osmosis. Now, the reason why water is going to follow the sugars that are now pumped into the phloem tissue is because, remember, they're trying to maintain a state of equilibrium between the solute concentration on one side of the cell and the solute concentration on the other side. So now that you have an area that is loaded with sugars, well, water is going to move in hopes of diluting that area so that equilibrium is maintained. Then once the sugars leave the phloem tissue, we're asking, what is the tonicity of the palisade cells in relation to the phloem tissue? Which way does the water flow? Well, if the sugars are now moved out, then water is also going to move out of the phloem tissue in hopes of once again maintaining that balance. So wherever the sugars went, the water is going to follow in hopes of diluting that area. So once water flows into the phloem tissue, remember that there's already sugars there. So now you got not just sugars inside the phloem tissue, but you got water as well. There is going to be a lot of pressure because that's a lot of particles in a very small space. So remember, pressure gradients, like concentration, also try to reach equilibrium. So what's going to happen is that we've got an area of high pressure inside the phloem tissue. It's going to want to move towards an area of lower pressure, which would be down the tubes into the roots. So where water goes from the roots to the leaves, now we have sugar transport that is going from the leaves to the roots. And the vessels that transport this are the phloem vessels. So a lot of pressure at the roots. We're sending the water and the sap or the sugars down the phloem tubes to an area where there is less pressure. And if we're comparing here between the osmotic pressure or the water pressure in the roots from the water uptake, it's relatively low compared to the phloem tube. So it's still in the interest that water is pushed down the phloem tubes into the roots, even though there is already some pressure there.